There were 18 candles on the cake at my 18th birthday dinner. The name written in frosting across the top was not mine. That same evening, out in the driveway, my parents pulled a bedsheet off a cherry red Camaro and handed the keys to my 16-year-old brother. My gift came after the cake. My father walked me out to the porch rail and gave me a lecture about responsibility. It had three parts. I counted. I have always counted. Counting is the reason I am still here. By 4 the next morning, I was walking down Route 12 with a duffel bag, $47, and a bus ticket out of my own life. 2 weeks later, my father called me, and this man, who I had never once seen cry, was sobbing into the phone. Please, he kept saying, please, honey, just come home. It took me 12 years to learn what those tears were actually for. And it took me 40 years, a stolen name, a sworn affidavit, one postcard hidden under a cash drawer, and a phone call to a stranger in New Mexico to finally end a story that started in my family 2 generations before I was born. My name is Sylvia. I am 64 years old, and I am the first woman in 3 generations of my family who gets to tell this story out loud. If you have ever been the child who did everything and was seen for none of it, this story is yours too. So tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight and subscribe before you settle in. Because I am going to promise you 3 things before we start. You are going to find out what my father's tears were really for, and it is worse than you are guessing. You are going to find out what sat hidden under the cash drawer of our family store for 67 years, while 3 generations counted money on top of it. And you are going to find out what that cherry red car actually cost and whose name paid for it. That last one took even me 40 years to see, and it is the one that still keeps my brother up at night. All right, Maple Creek, Indiana. Population 3,800, 2 stoplights, 1 diner, and a church whose potluck politics could humble Washington. On the corner of Main and 3rd stood a brick building with gold letters painted on the glass. Danner and Son Farm Supply, established 1948. My grandfather Emmett hired the painter the year he came home from the war, and I want you to look closely at the wording because the whole crime in this story is hiding inside it. It did not say Danner family. It said son, singular. Like a law of nature, like gravity, painted right on the glass where the whole town could read it, and the whole town did read it, for 70 years, without once asking the only question that mattered. Whose money bought the paint? Hold that question. It has an answer, and the answer has a name, and I did not learn it until I was standing beside a hospital bed at 30 years old. My grandfather ran that store. Then my father, Wendell Danner, ran it. My little brother Wade was going to run it someday, and everyone in Maple Creek knew that before Wade could reliably walk. And me? I stocked those shelves free of charge every summer of my childhood. I priced seed packets and counted bolts into paper bags and swept that oak floor 10,000 times. And in that store, I learned to count everything: stock, hours, change, and the number of times my own name got said out loud in a day. Small numbers, mostly. Here's what the pattern looked like from inside, and I will give you just 2 pictures because 2 is enough. Picture 1. I am 10 years old, standing on a milk crate in the stockroom with a price stamper, working through 3 cases of mason jars. Wade is 8, sitting up on the front counter eating a creamsicle while Dad shows him how the register drawer opens. He is learning the business, Dad says. I ask if I can learn the register too. And my father, without even looking up, says the sentence that was the actual motto of my childhood, engraved deeper than anything on the sign. You are doing fine where you are. Picture 2. I am 12, mopping by the paint shelves, and a customer asks my father if his kids will take the store over someday. Dad puts his hand on Wade's shoulder and says, my boy is going to run this place. Then he nods over at me at the mop and says, and the girl is good help. The customer laughed. My father laughed. I kept mopping. The girl is good help. I want to be fair, and I have had 40 years to get fair about this. Nobody hit me. Nobody went hungry in that house. What my parents did was slower and quieter than anything you could report to anyone, and it took me half my life to find the right words for it. They did not raise 2 children. They raised an heir and a staff. At home, the chore chart on the refrigerator had one name on it. Mine. Wade's chores were listed as helping Dad, which meant riding to the grain elevator and getting a root beer on the way home. My mother, Arlene, kept the books for the store, unpaid, for 30 years, and you would think a woman doing free bookkeeping for a business with sun on the window might have noticed the arithmetic of her own life. She did not. She enforced it. Sylvia, take the small bedroom. Your brother needs room for his drum kit. Sylvia, hush now. Wade is watching his game. My mother was not the author of the system. She was its sergeant. I have come to understand there is a particular kind of woman who guards the fence she herself is penned behind, and I have made a certain peace with her memory, but we will get to that. Now, two people in Maple Creek said my name like it meant somebody, and you need them both. The first was my grandmother, my father's mother, Opal Danner, who everyone called Nana Opal, and who owned, this detail matters more than anything else in this story, the brick building the store sat in. Grandpa left it to her outright in 1971, and she collected rent from her own son on the first of every month for the rest of her life. And she was the only person alive that my father was visibly careful around. The second person was a name I did not even know I was missing. One October afternoon when I was 15, helping Nana Opal put up applesauce, I found a photograph in her sideboard drawer, black and white, scalloped edges. A girl about my age standing in front of the store, arms crossed, not smiling, in a checked dress with a suitcase at her feet. I asked who it was, and my grandmother, who was never once in her life at a loss for words, took that photograph out of my hand, looked at it for a long moment, and said, "That is a story you are not old enough to carry." Then she said something stranger. She said, "When the day comes that you need it, ask me about Doreen." Doreen. There was no Doreen in our family. I knew every cousin to the third degree, every headstone in the Methodist cemetery with our name on it. No Doreen? Anywhere. I was 15, so I shrugged it off the way you shrug things at 15. But the name went into my pocket like a key to a door I had not found yet. Hold on to Doreen. This whole story, 3 generations of it, unlocks with that name. Senior year, I found my own door. It was a careers day of all things, and a woman from an accounting firm in Fort Wayne stood up in our gymnasium in a blazer the color of good coffee and said, "Numbers do not care who your father is." I swear I sat up like she had called my name. She talked about ledgers and audits and the sentence that changed my life, which was, "The books always tell the truth eventually. My job is to make them say it sooner." I went home glowing. I had the brochure, a 2-year bookkeeping certificate at the technical college in Fort Wayne, then the accounting program, and I had done the arithmetic on notebook paper. I could cover nearly half of it myself waitressing if they helped with the rest. I brought it up at supper. My father let me finish, wiped his mouth, and delivered a speech I could still recite under anesthesia. Money does not grow on trees, Sylvia. This family does not hand out free rides. A girl with a good head does not need a certificate to keep books. Your mother never needed one. My mother, free bookkeeper of 30 years, nodded along on the beat. Wade was 16 that spring and had never worked one shift anywhere, but the new drum kit in his bedroom was, I was told, an investment in the boy's confidence. And that same month, I came home early from my shift at the Maple Creek Diner and found my parents at the kitchen table with a salesman whose windbreaker said Route 9 Auto Sales. All 3 of them smiling over an open folder. When I walked in, my mother flipped the folder shut. Not slowly, the way you flip something shut when the person walking in is the subject of it. "Store business, honey," she said, and started talking about rain. "I want you to remember that folder, and remember this too, because I did not understand it for years. That spring, an envelope came in the mail addressed to me, not to my parents, to me, my full legal name, Sylvia K. Danner, from a bank in Indianapolis I had never heard of in my life. I was 17. I stood right there in the kitchen and asked my mother what it was. She took it out of my hands, easy as lifting scissors away from a toddler, glanced at it and said, 'Junk mail, sweetheart. They send those to everybody,' and tucked it into her apron pocket and asked me to check the beans. I noticed. I asked. I got an answer built to end the asking. That is how it works in houses like ours, friends. The crime is not hidden in a safe. It is hidden in plain sight, wrapped in a bored voice, sitting in an apron pocket 3 feet from your face while you stir the beans. Remember that envelope. It comes back with interest." June 6th, 1980. I turned 18 on a Friday, 10 days after my high school graduation. I got up early and baked the cake myself, yellow with chocolate frosting, because that was the tradition in our house. I baked on birthdays, including mine, especially mine. My mother came down, kissed the air somewhere near my head, and said, "Big dinner tonight, sweetheart. The whole family is coming. Wear something nice." And I stood there with flour on my hands and let myself hope. Of everything I am going to tell you tonight, that is still the part that embarrasses me most. 18 years of evidence, and I ironed a dress anyway. Around noon, the phone rang, and it was Nana Opal, and she did not sing happy birthday. She said, "You are 18 today. That number matters more than they think it does." There was something in her voice I could not place, like a woman standing between me and weather I could not see yet. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "you call me after." I laughed and asked what could possibly happen at a birthday dinner. My grandmother did not laugh back. The relatives arrived at 6, and there was a strange electricity in that driveway, grown people grinning at each other over my head, and a long shape parked out front under a bedsheet that every single person pretended not to see. So I pretended too. That was my job in that family, and I was good help. We ate. Then my father stood, tapped his water glass, and said, "Before we cut the cake, this family has something special tonight." And he walked us all out front and pulled the sheet off a cherry red Camaro dealer sticker still in the window and tossed the keys across the yard to my 16-year-old brother. Wade screamed. He actually screamed. Everyone clapped, and my father put his arm around him and gave the longest speech I had heard him give in years about the Danner name, about the store, about how a young man needs something he can count on under him. This family invests in its future, my father said. On my birthday, in my ironed dress, I stood on the porch steps and applauded my brother's car. And then my mother carried out the cake, 18 candles already lit, and written across the top in the bakery's blue cursive, because it turned out my yellow cake had been quietly set aside for a store-bought one, were the words, "Way to go, Wade." His car, his cake, my candles. My mother caught me reading the frosting, and she smiled the way you smile at a slow child and said, "One cake covers both celebrations, Sylvia. Do not make a face on your birthday. Do not make a face on your birthday." I laughed with everyone because if I had not laughed, I would have come apart on the porch steps in front of 30 relatives. And I leaned down and I blew out my own 18 candles on my brother's congratulations cake. And if you want to know what I wished for exactly what I did 9 hours later. After the cake, my father found me at the porch rail. And for 3 full seconds, fool that I was, I thought, here it comes, the part where he remembers me. He put his hand on my shoulder, heavy as a feed sack, and said, "Now that you are 18, Sylvia, we need to talk about responsibility." That was my birthday present, friends. A lecture in 3 parts, delivered to the porch while my brother revved his new engine in the driveway. Part 1. Responsibility. A Danner pulls her weight, and now that school was finished, I would be working full days at the store starting Monday. Part 2. Gratitude. Everything I had, this family gave me, and a grateful girl does not go around asking for handouts, which was aimed with the precision of a dart at a bookkeeping brochure that had quietly disappeared from my bedroom 2 weeks before. Part 3. Family. Family means nobody keeps score, Sylvia. He said that sentence, I need you to sit with this. He said family means nobody keeps score, with a straight face, at a party where the score was parked in the driveway with a dealer sticker on it. And then, turning to go back inside, almost to himself, my father added one more thing. Monday morning, before your shift, you will ride with me to First State Bank. Now that you are 18, there is grown-up paperwork to square away. Bank matters. And he patted my cheek twice gently, the way a man pats something that belongs to him. Bank matters. Keep that phrase where you can reach it, friends. It is the reason this story has an ending instead of just a wound. Through the kitchen window, I could see Wade watching us, keys still in his fist. And my brother, who had never in his life had one moment of trouble meeting my eyes, looked away. 16 years old, and he looked away. And some animal part of me, the part that counts, filed that under things that are wrong here and kept the file open. The party ended by 10. I hugged relatives goodbye on my birthday while they congratulated my brother. Then I washed the dishes for 30 people alone in my mother's yellow rubber gloves, while 2/3 of Wade's cake sat under plastic wrap with my candle holes still in it, like 18 little graves. People imagine that decisions like mine happen in an explosion. Mine happened over a sink. I dried the last plate, hung the gloves on their hook, and something in me that had been negotiating for 18 years simply adjourned. Upstairs, I packed like I was going to a sleepover, one duffel bag, 2 changes of clothes, my documents, birth certificate, social security card, diploma, because even at 18, I was the only person in that house who knew which drawer those lived in. I had filed them myself. And a roll of babysitting and diner money I had kept for 2 years inside an empty cold cream jar on my dresser, the one place no one in that family would ever think to look, because it belonged to me and was therefore invisible. $47. There had been more in April. The dress my mother insisted I buy for Wade's junior prom banquet ate the difference. And yes, you heard that sentence correctly. And no, we do not have time tonight to unpack it. I stood in the doorway of the smallest bedroom in the house and looked at it for a moment, and I did not leave a note. Notes are for people who will wonder. At 4 a.m, I walked out the kitchen door, past the Camaro with its ribbon wilting in the dew, down Route 12 to the Sunoco where the Trailways bus stopped, and I bought a one-way ticket to Indianapolis for $11. And I did not look out the window when we passed the store. I had swept that floor enough times to know exactly what it looked like. Indianapolis at 7 in the morning is loud and completely uninterested in you, and I want to tell you, after 18 years of being watched by a town and seen by nobody, anonymity felt like clean water. I am not going to romanticize what came next, because the first 2 weeks were frightening and they smelled like a bus station. I slept 2 nights in the Trailways terminal with my duffel strap wrapped around my wrist. A woman at a church desk pointed me to a boarding house on the east side that took young women $4 a night, a cot, a locker, and a house mother named Mrs. Peatway, who ran the place like a submarine and kept peppermints in her cardigan for girls who cried at dinner. On day 3, I found work. Hobart Office Supply and Ledger Company, a warehouse and print shop off Shadeland Avenue, needed a stock girl. The floor manager, a barrel of a woman named Greta Kowalczyk, hired me for one stated reason. I showed up at 6 in the morning 2 days in a row without being told to. Within a month, she had me checking invoices against deliveries because I caught an error in my first week, a case of carbon paper billed twice, and I will tell you the truth, catching it felt better than my whole birthday had. On day 5, I used the payphone in the boarding house hallway and called the only number I had carried out of Maple Creek on paper. Nana Opal answered on the second ring like she had been sitting beside the phone since Friday. "I am safe," I said. "I am in the city. Do not tell them where." I could hear my grandmother breathing, steady as a mantel clock. "I will not," she said. And then, before she hung up, she said the sentence I have carried like a coin in my pocket for 46 years. "For the record, child, you should have had your own cake. It sounds small. Stand where I was standing in a hallway that smelled of other people's suppers. 20 cents poorer, 18 years old. It was the first time in my life that anyone had put it on the record at all. That phrase is hers, by the way. For the record. My grandmother said it the way other people say amen, and I did not understand yet that she was handing me, 2 words at a time, the family survival kit. Meanwhile, 90 miles north, here is what was happening in my parents' house. And I know this because my grandmother reported it to me later, dry as unbuttered toast. Nobody noticed I was gone until Sunday evening. 2 full days. The prevailing theory was that I was sulking in my room, and the theory survived that long because the chores were the only part of me that was missed, and my mother assumed a sulking girl would still do them quietly. When they finally opened my door and found the closet thin and the cold cream jar empty, my mother's first telephone call was not to the sheriff. It was to my grandmother. And her first question, Nana Opal swore this to me on her Bible, was not, "Is Sylvia all right?" It was, "Did she say anything about Monday? Did she say anything about Monday? Hold that up to the light, friends." Their daughter had vanished into the night with a duffel bag, and the first thing my mother needed to know was whether I had made the bank appointment. 14 days after my birthday, the boarding house phone rang for me, and it was my father. To this day, I do not know what it cost him to get that number or who gave it up. I stood in the hallway with the receiver in my hand, and my father, Wendell Danner, a man I had never once in 18 years seen shed one tear, not at his own father's funeral, not ever, was crying. "Sylvie." He had not called me Sylvie since I was 6. "Sylvie. Honey, please. Your mother is sick over this. The whole house is upside down. We did wrong by you, sweetheart. I know it. I know it now. Please just come home, sweetheart. Honey, Sylvie." 18 years, and I could have counted the endearments on one hand with fingers left over, and here they came, pouring out like coins from a broken slot machine. And I want to be honest with you about what it did to me, because if you have ever been starved for a parent's tenderness, you already know. It worked. My eyes went hot. My throat closed up. Somewhere in my chest, the 10-year-old on the milk crate put down her price stamper and started listening. I actually heard myself begin to say the word okay. And then, underneath his crying, faint but perfectly clear, the way you hear a television in another room, I heard my mother's voice in the background, low, impatient. Her register voice, the one she used when a customer was taking too long counting change. She did not know I could hear her. She said, "Just get her home before the first of the month. The bank will not hold it open forever. The bank will not hold it open forever." My father kept crying into my ear, grief on the top channel, logistics on the bottom, and I stood in that boarding house hallway listening to both at once, and friends. Something happened to me that I can only describe as a room-changing temperature. "Sylvie, you still there, baby?" I looked at the receiver the way you look at something that has just moved in the corner of your eye, and I said, "Tell Mom the first of the month is a Tuesday," and I hung up. I gave myself one night to grieve that phone call, one on the fire escape with a bottle of orange soda, and I cried until the streetlights smeared, and then I was done the way you are done with a shift, because a terrible gift had been handed to me in that hallway, and I knew it even then. Most people wait decades to learn what their parents' tears are for. I got my answer at 18, in stereo. The tears were not for me. The tears were for something at a bank with a deadline on it. I did not know yet what. It would be 2 more years before the what walked up and introduced itself. That night, Nana Opal called the boarding house, and I told her all of it, the crying, the sweethearts, the first of the month. And my grandmother was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do not come back for them, child. If you ever come back for you." And then she said, "Now, tell me about this Greta person and whether they pay you what the boys make." That was my grandmother. One sentence for the wound and then straight on to the audit. Sundays became the architecture of my whole life after that. Every Sunday at 4, Nana Opal called, and we traded our weeks like ration cards, her hip, my invoices, the pie situation at First Methodist, whether Mrs. Petway's peppermints violated any commandments. She never once asked when I was coming home. She asked better questions. "What is a debit?" she asked me once, genuinely curious, a woman who had collected rent for 30 years. And when I explained double entry to her, that every single thing that happens gets written down twice, once where it came from and once where it went, my grandmother was silent a moment and then said, "Well, if churches ran that way, we would all be better off." Here's the thing I noticed, though, and I want you to notice it with me because it is a diagnostic you can use in your own family. After that one tearful phone call, my father never called again. Not on my 19th birthday, not at Christmas, not once. A man weeps down a telephone line like his chest is caving in, begs his daughter to come home, and then follows it with years of total silence. Tears that urgent do not simply evaporate, friends, unless they were never attached to the daughter in the first place. Unless they were attached to a deadline, and the deadline passed. File that. We will need it. Let me tell you what those next 2 years built, quickly, because I am prouder of them than of anything except what comes at the end. Greta Kowalczyk moved me off the warehouse floor and into the office, where I posted invoices at a wooden desk with a 10-key adding machine, and I found out that the thing I had been doing my whole childhood for free, counting, checking, noticing, was a profession, and people were paid for it. Greta had one rule, stenciled on the wall over the filing cabinets in her own hand. If it is not in the ledger, it did not happen. The first time I read that sentence, I felt it go through me like a current, though I could not have told you why. Nobody files a police report about a chore chart, friends. Nobody notarizes a birthday. My whole childhood had happened off the books, and here was a wall telling me there was another way to live, a way where things got written down and stayed written, where the record did not care who your father was. I enrolled in the bookkeeping certificate at the technical college that fall, night classes, cash at the bursar's window, one course at a time. I kept every receipt, I kept every pay stub. And Greta teased me for it, the boarding house rent book with Mrs. Petway's initials in it, week after week after week. It is a work habit, I told people. That was half the truth. The other half is that a girl whose family kept no record of her learns to keep her own, the way a country with no allies builds a large army. And then, at 20, the army was needed. By then, I had a friend, my first chosen one, a fellow night class student named Patrice Holloway, loud, generous, studying for the CPA exam on her lunch breaks, and she and I decided to graduate from our respective boarding rooms and rent a real apartment together, a 2-bedroom in Irvington with a radiator that sang and a tree outside the window. We toured it twice. We budgeted it to the dime because between the two of us, we were essentially a walking audit, and we sat in the rental office while the manager ran our applications, and I watched his face do a complicated thing at his desk, and he asked Patrice to give us the room. "Miss Danner," he said, "we cannot approve you as a leaseholder. There is a credit problem." I told him, politely, that there must be a mix-up because I was 20 years old and had no credit at all. No card, no loan, nothing. I had paid cash for every single thing in my life, which I had always considered a virtue. He turned his monitor a few degrees toward me, not all the way, just the amount people turn a screen when the news is bad and not technically theirs to deliver. "Ma'am, this file shows accounts going back 4 years. Collections activity. A charge-off." He squinted at the screen, then at me, and said the sentence that cut my life into a before and an after. "You have a grown woman's credit history here, and you are telling me you are 20. That night I sat cross-legged on Patrice's floor with the 3 bureau reports we ordered, and my hands did the thing they still do in a crisis. They went calm and cold and precise, which is Greta's training and my inheritance, the only one I got. 3 accounts, a store charge card, a gasoline card, and a personal line of credit at First State Bank of Maple Creek, the bank with the lollipops at the teller window, the bank my father wanted to walk me into on the Monday after my birthday. Combined balance with interest and late fees, $19,700. The oldest account was opened in November of 1978. In November of 1978, friends, I was 16 years old. I sat on that floor doing the arithmetic of my own childhood. The billing address on every account was my parents' house. The envelope when I was 17. My full legal name, a bank I had never heard of. Junk mail, sweetheart. Every lecture my father ever gave me about money played back in a new key. Money does not grow on trees, Sylvia, delivered while my name was out working for him at 21% interest. This family does not hand out free rides, said the man riding one. And then the final tile clicked into the mosaic so quietly I actually heard my own breath change. Monday morning, First State Bank. Grown-up paperwork to square away. Get her home before the first of the month. The bank will not hold it open forever. They had not wanted their daughter back. They had wanted the signature. At 18, I had become, legally for the first time, capable of signing my own name to their debt, of converting their crime into my obligation with one pen stroke at a lollipop counter. That was the paperwork. That was the deadline. That is what my father's tears had been for. Patrice found me on the floor at 2 in the morning, statements fanned around me like tarot. Sylvia, whose accounts are those? And I heard my own voice answer from somewhere across the room. Mine, apparently. I have been very generous. The next day, on my lunch break, I sat in Greta's borrowed office chair with a legal pad and called the fraud department at First State Bank of Maple Creek, and a woman answered whose voice had heard everything twice. I explained. Accounts opened in my name while I was a minor at a bank I had never been a customer of. She did not gasp. The not gasping told me plenty. Ma'am, was your social security number accessible to a parent or guardian? Yes. Then she walked me through it like a recipe she knew by heart. To dispute the debt as fraud, I would need a police report and a sworn identity theft affidavit. And on that affidavit, there is a line, one line, where you print the name of the person who used your identity and you sign underneath it, under penalty of perjury. And then she paused and her voice came off its uniform for one sentence. Most young people in your chair never file, honey. Do you want to know why? I said I thought I could guess. Because the name that goes on that line, she said, is usually a parent. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. What happens if I do not file? Papers shuffled softly, 90 miles away. Then the debt is yours, ma'am. All of it. $19,700, or my father's name on a federal form. Pick one, Sylvia. There is no door number 3. I called the house that Sunday after Nana Opal's call, so I would have something steady in my ear first. And that was deliberate. I recommend it. Always take on the hard call with a good voice still warm in your ear. My mother answered. I kept it clinical. I had seen my credit file. I knew about the 3 accounts, and I knew the oldest one was opened when I was 16. There was a pause with a whole cathedral in it. And then my mother, who never raised her voice in her life, that was always her genius, ran a lazy loop of the classics. Banks make mistakes, Sylvia. And I would have to ask your father. I do not concern myself with every little account. The bookkeeper of 30 years did not concern herself with every little account. And then, the closer, the one I want you to have on paper for your own kitchens. And honestly, honey, even if there were such accounts, households share expenses. You lived under that roof rent-free for 18 years. Rent-free. The unpaid staff had been living rent-free. Then a rustle, and my father took the receiver, and there was no confusion in his voice at all, and I want you to notice what he did not say. He did not say, what accounts? He did not say, there must be a mistake. He said, family money is family money, Sylvia. Slow and patient like teaching a child to read. You would have wasted it on some certificate anyway. At least it went to things that last. Things that last. I stood in a hallway in Indianapolis and understood that we were discussing a Camaro. So I told him what the bank told me. Police report, affidavit, a line for a name. And the patience went out of my father like a plug pulled from a wall. You file that paper, he said, and you have no family. Do you hear me? None. No mother, no brother, no Christmas, no name. You will be no daughter of ours. And I thanked him for his time, which is the diner girl in me, permanent as a scar, and I sat with the dead receiver in my lap, and I thought, there it is at last, out loud, on the table. The price tag. They had finally quoted me the exact market value of my membership in that family, $19,700. It had never been priceless, friends. It had a number the whole time, and I was the last to be told. The following Saturday, my grandmother rode 90 miles on the First Methodist van, 71 years old, in her good coat, carrying a Tupperware of apple crisp like a diplomatic pouch, and she sat at our second-hand table and listened to the whole accounting, the report, the numbers, the ultimatum, with her hands folded on her purse. And here is what shook me more than anything my parents had done. My grandmother never once looked surprised. Angry, yes. Her mouth went to a thin line I recognize now in my own mirror. But surprised? No. And when I finished, Opal Danner looked out our window at the singing radiator for a long moment and said quietly, "Your father learned this somewhere, child." I asked her what that meant. She shook her head once, the way she did at rummage sales when a price was foolish. "Not yet. That story will help you one day, when you are deciding something bigger than this. Today it would only break your heart in a direction you cannot afford." Then she opened her pocketbook and set $200 on my table, worn 20s, teller neat. And when I pushed it back, she pushed it back at me with one finger, final as a gavel. "It is not charity, Sylvia. It is back pay." And at the door, buttoning her coat, she turned around and gave me the sentence that governed everything I did afterward. "Whatever you decide about that paper, you file it or you do not file it for you. Not for them, not against them. For the record of you." I wrote it down that night. By then, you understand, I wrote everything down. The affidavit sat on my kitchen table for 19 days. I know it was 19 because I made a pencil mark on the wall calendar every night I went to bed without signing it. Counting again. Patrice never said a word about the paper on the table. She just kept setting her coffee cup down next to it every morning, a little closer each day, like she was warming the thing up for me. And I will tell you what stopped me for 19 days, because it was not love. It was the oldest arithmetic in my body. Family means nobody keeps score. 18 years of that sentence does not wash out in 2 years of freedom. You can leave the house in one night. The house takes longer to leave you. What finally moved my hand was not anger. It was Greta's wall. If it is not in the ledger, it did not happen. My whole childhood had happened off the books, unrecorded, unpriced, deniable. And I thought, no, not this one. This one goes in the ledger. I printed the name in block letters, the way the form asked, Wendell Ray Danner. My hand did not shake, and I have never decided whether to be proud of that or sad about it. The next morning, I had it notarized at a savings and loan on 10th Street by a man who stamped it without reading it, which struck me as a miracle. The police report came next, and the road bent exactly the way you would guess. I called the Maple Creek sheriff first, like a good citizen, and Sheriff Dwight Hobbs himself picked up, a man who had hunted turkey with my father every spring since before I was born. "Well now, Sylvia," he said, "this sounds like a family matter more than a criminal one." The fraud woman at the bank just sighed when I told her, the sigh of a woman watching a rerun. "File it where you live, honey. The city does not hunt turkey with anybody." So I filed it in Indianapolis, with a detective who typed with 2 fingers and never looked up once, and his boredom was the most beautiful thing I had seen all year. To him, my father was just a name on a line, exactly the size of what he had done. The bank took it from there. They gave my father a choice that was not really a choice. Make the accounts whole, every dollar, every dime of interest, or the file goes to the prosecutor with a sworn affidavit and a minor's birth certificate stapled to it. He paid. It took him 11 months, a second mortgage on the house, and the sale of 2 acres behind the store that had been in the family since Eisenhower. And here is a detail I want you to have, because it is the whole man in one line. He never once called me to rage about it. Raging would have meant admitting it happened. Instead, that Christmas, a card arrived at my apartment with no return address. My mother's handwriting, that perfect Palmer method cursive they taught farm girls in the 40s. One sentence: "I hope you are happy with what you have done to this family." No signature. She could not spare me her own name, friends, on a card about the theft of mine. I taped it into my journal next to the bank's letter, the official one, the one that said the accounts had been removed from my credit file and the matter was resolved. 2 documents, side by side. One said I had destroyed the family. One said the record was clean. I have kept them together for 44 years, because together they tell the truth and separately they each tell a lie. The excommunication came exactly as promised. No mother, no brother, no Christmas, no name. My father was a man of his word, which is a strange thing to say about a forger, but there it is. People are not one thing. That is what makes them so hard to survive. And somewhere in the 3rd year of being cast out, you wake up one ordinary Tuesday and realize the sentence they used as a sword, "You are no daughter of ours," has quietly turned into a receipt, paid in full, nothing further owed. And the space where the fear had lived did not stay empty either. Things moved in. I finished the bookkeeping certificate in 1983, first in a class of 31, and Greta took me to a steakhouse where the menus had tassels and raised a glass of beer to the girl who checks the math. Then I enrolled in the accounting program. Nights, weekends, cash at the bursar's window, 1 course at a time, 6 years of it, while Patrice and I quizzed each other over meatloaf and the radiator sang along. In 1989, at 27, I sat for the CPA exam and passed all 4 parts the first time. 11% of candidates did that year. I know the number because you know by now that I would. When my license came in the mail, Sylvia K. Danner, certified public accountant, I called Nana Opal before I had even closed the mailbox, and my grandmother, 78 years old by then, was quiet for a moment on the line. Then she said, "Read me the whole thing. Every word on the paper, child," slowly. And I stood in the street and read my grandmother every word of my license, the state seal, the number, the date. And when I finished, she said, "For the record, that is the first Danner name on a license that was earned instead of inherited." Then she said, "Now frame it where visitors can see it." Modesty is for people who were given things. I bought a little house in Irvington the next spring, brick, 2 bedrooms, a porch with a swing. Patrice had married by then, a gentle bear of a man named DeWitt, who fixed elevators and laughed at everything. The first night in that house, I sat on my own swing and drank orange soda, and I thought about the fire escape when I was 18, and I let the 2 nights shake hands. And every Sunday at 4, the phone rang. Her hip. My clients. The pie situation at First Methodist. Whether DeWitt could be trusted around her apple crisp recipe, which she eventually surrendered to him in a sealed envelope like state secrets. 12 years of Sundays, friends. People count inheritance in dollars and acres. I count mine in phone calls. News from Maple Creek came through her, thin but steady. Wade had married a girl from Kokomo named Darla in 1986. The store ate the marriage within 6 years, the way that store ate everything, and Darla went back to Kokomo, but not before there was a baby, a girl, born in 1990. They named her Kayla. I sent a savings bond through my grandmother, anonymous. Hold on to Kayla, friends, the way you held on to Doreen. The wells in this story all echo eventually. It was a Sunday in March of 1992 when the architecture cracked. 4 o'clock came and the phone did not ring. 10 passed, 20 passed. I had my coat on by 4:30 and I was 90 miles up Route 37 before I had consciously decided anything. Driving back toward the town I had left on foot 12 years before, and I remember thinking, so this is what it takes. Not his tears. Her silence. She was in the county hospital in Marion, 2 towns over. A stroke, her second, because she had hidden the first one from me the previous fall, the way she hid anything that might cost somebody else something. When I walked into that room, my mother was already there, sitting in the corner with her purse on her knees like a woman at a bus stop. We looked at each other for the first time in 12 years. She said, "Well, you look thin." And I said, "Hello, Mom." And that was the entire exchange, friends, and I am not angry when I tell you that. Some accounts are simply closed. You do not keep making entries in a closed account. My grandmother's face had gone crooked on the left side, and her left hand lay on the blanket like a glove somebody dropped. But her eyes were all the way alive, and when they found me, her right hand patted the bed once. "Sit." I sat with her every day for 11 days, and I am going to give you the two that matter. On the 4th day, she sent my mother home to rest and waited for the door to click, and then turned her eyes on me. Her speech had come partway back, slow, dragging its left foot, but her sentences still went exactly where she aimed them. "You remember the photograph?" she said. "In the sideboard. The girl with the suitcase." I said I remembered. I had carried the name in my pocket for 35 years. "Ask me about Doreen," I said. And my grandmother closed her eyes and gathered herself the way you gather something heavy from a bottom shelf, and finally paid out the story she had been holding since before I was born. Doreen was her daughter, her firstborn, my father's older sister, 6 years ahead of him, born in 1930 with, and this is my grandmother verbatim, a head for figures that frightened the teachers. During the war years, while my grandfather Emmett was overseas, it was Doreen who kept that family fed. 15, 16 years old, working the line at the canning plant in Marion, then keeping the plant's shipping tallies when the foreman noticed she never missed. Every payday, she split her envelope 3 ways: a third to her mother for the house, a third to war stamps, and a third into a passbook savings account at First State Bank, her own name on it, the first Danner woman with money on paper. By 1948, there was $1,100 in that passbook. In 1948, friends, $1,100 was a house down payment. It was a college education. It was a life. And in 1948, Emmett Danner came home from the war with a plan and no capital, and he found the capital sleeping in his daughter's sock drawer. He did not steal it in the night. He did it at the kitchen table in daylight, which is how family theft is always done. He drove Doreen to the bank himself in her good checked dress, and stood beside her while she signed her savings over into the store's opening stock, and the loan officer smiled at what a generous girl she was. "This is an investment, Dory," he told her. "This store will be your future, too." And then he hired the painter. And Doreen stood on the sidewalk on Main and 3rd and watched a man on a ladder write her future on the glass in gold leaf. Danner and Son, her money, her brother's name. Wendell was 12 years old, friends. He had never earned a dime. That sign was not a description of the store, it was a prophecy, purchased with a daughter's wages and dedicated to a boy who was still losing his baby teeth. Doreen asked her father when her name would go up. And Emmett Danner laughed, not cruelly, my grandmother said, which somehow made it worse, and delivered the sentence my father would inherit along with the store keys and hand down to me at a kitchen table 34 years later, word for word, like a psalm. Family money is family money, Dory. The same sentence. The exact same sentence, friends. When my father said it to me in 1982, he was not improvising. He was reciting. That is what my grandmother meant 10 years earlier in our apartment when she said, "Your father learned this somewhere." It is what she meant in that hospital bed when she said, "Slow and dead aimed, none of this started with you, child. You were born into the middle of a sentence that started in 1948." Doreen lasted 8 months after the sign went up. She kept the store's books for free, the way her mother would after her, and watched her $1,100 become shelves and seed and a cash register she was allowed to clean but not to run. And one morning in the spring of 1949, she put on the same check dress, packed one suitcase, and stood out front while her mother took a photograph with the Brownie camera, because Opal understood even then, even complicit as she was, that somebody ought to make a record. Then Doreen got on the Trailways bus, heading west. I walked out of that family 31 years later on the same bus line, friends from the same corner, and I did not know I was a rerun. I thought my leaving was mine. It turns out even our escapes were inherited. One postcard came that fall, a picture of a mesa at sunset, postmarked Tucumcari, New Mexico. My grandmother recited it to me in that hospital bed 43 years after reading it, and her voice did not drag once. I made it somewhere that writes my name down. I keep books for a ranch supply, and they pay me Fridays like anyone. Do not send Daddy after me, and do not send apologies you have to hide. Tell Wendell the sign is his problem now. Your daughter, Doreen. Emmett never saw that postcard. Opal read it in the kitchen, alone, and then she hid it in the one place her husband would never in his life think to look. She walked down to the store after closing and she lifted the cash tray out of the register drawer and she laid her daughter's postcard flat underneath it and set the money back on top. Under the drawer, she told me, and her right hand made a small flat motion on the blanket, laying it down again 43 years later. Under the money he counted every night of his life. He counted on top of her for 30 years, child, and never once looked underneath. I asked her why she never wrote back, and my grandmother was quiet for a long time. "Because I chose," she said finally. When Doreen asked me the night before she left to stand up with her against him, I chose the marriage. I chose the roof. I told my own daughter, "Do not make a face, it is only a sign. Do not make a face." I had to hold the bed rail. Because that was my mother's sentence, friends, the one she laid across my 18th birthday like a lid. Do not make a face on your birthday. The women in my family had been passing that sentence down alongside the theft, and my grandmother had said it first, and had spent every year since 1949 doing penance for it. Now the building made sense. In 1971, with Emmett dying slowly of his heart, it was Opal who nursed him, 3 years of it. And her price, named calmly at his bedside with the lawyer present, was the deed to the brick building on Main and 3rd. Not the store, the ground under the store. He signed it because he had no one else, and my grandmother collected rent from her own son for the rest of her life, the first of every month, and now you know what that rent was. It was back pay. It was Doreen's $1,100 coming home $200 at a time, decade after decade, into the hands of the only person keeping the account. For the record, her whole life, friends, that phrase, and I had thought it was a figure of speech. It was a confession. It was a woman keeping one entry alive in a ledger everyone else had burned. On the 9th day, she had Mr. Beecham come from Fort Wayne. Beecham was her lawyer, a round, unhurried man with a bow tie and a briefcase old enough to vote, and he sat with her alone for an hour while I drank hospital coffee and read the same page of a magazine 11 times. When he came out, he handed me his card and said, "Your grandmother is the most organized client of my 40-year career, and I once represented a funeral home." Then he said, "When the time comes, you will call me before you talk to anyone else in your family. Say yes." I said yes. On the 11th day, a Sunday, I sat with her through the afternoon. The others had come and gone, my father stiff in the doorway, never fully entering the room, as if the room were a paper he refused to sign. Wade had visited twice, hat in his hands, and both times he looked at me sideways and said nothing. At 4 o'clock, out of 50 years of habit, my grandmother's eyes went to the phone on the nightstand. "It is Sunday," she said. "It is 4. I said. The call is local this week. And my grandmother smiled with the half of her face that still took orders, and we did it right there. The whole liturgy, her hip, my clients, the pie situation at First Methodist, with her in the bed and me in the chair, and it was the best phone call of my life, and no phone was involved. Near the end of it, she got quiet, and I thought she was sleeping. Then she said, "One more thing for the record." I leaned in. "You should have had your own cake," she said, "and your own name on the glass. And if I could do it over, child, I would have made a face. I would have made such a face." She died that Thursday morning, early while the nurse was changing shifts. 81 years old, Opal Marie Danner. The only person who ever guarded me and the first one who ever failed Doreen, and both of those things are true at once, and I have stopped trying to make them take turns. The funeral was at First Methodist, and I sat in the third pew, alone, because word of me and my affidavit had marinated in that town for a decade, and Maple Creek is loyal to its signs. My mother wore navy and greeted mourners like a hostess. My father shook hands at the church door, accepting condolences on the woman whose rent he had resented for 20 years. And I watched him and thought, you have no idea what Monday looks like. Monday looked like Beecham's office in Fort Wayne, walnut paneling, a secretary with a beehive that had outlasted 4 presidents, and my family arranged in chairs like a jury that expected to be paid. My father, my mother, Wade, me, in the back, by the window. Beecham read the small bequests first. The apple crisp recipe in its sealed envelope to DeWitt Holloway of Indianapolis, a man of honor. I laughed out loud, one bark, into a silent room, and I am not sorry. To her son Wendell, Beecham read, "I leave my forgiveness, which he has never asked for and therefore has never received. It is available upon request in writing." The room went the temperature of a root cellar. To her grandson Wade, I leave the framed photograph on my sideboard of a girl with a suitcase, and the strong suggestion that he ask his father who she is. And the residue of the estate, Beecham read, without changing pace at all, the brick building at the corner of Main and 3rd Streets, all rents and income arising from it, and the entire contents of my accounts. I leave to my granddaughter, Sylvia K. Danner, certified public accountant, the only member of this family who has ever balanced to the penny. I did not hear the next several seconds because of the roaring. My father was on his feet. "The store," he kept saying. "That building is the store. She has given this girl the store." And Beecham, folding his glasses with the calm of a man who had sat with Opal Danner for an hour on the 9th day, said the sentence I would like needle-pointed on a pillow. "No, sir. Your mother has given this girl the building. The store is yours, exactly as it always was. You will simply be writing the rent check to a new name." And I want to say plainly what that inheritance was, because my grandmother knew exactly how it would look. It was not a gift. It was a transfer of custody. She had held that building for 21 years the way a witness holds evidence, and she handed it to the one heir she trusted to keep the account open. That is not favoritism. That is succession planning. My mother stood, gathered her purse, and delivered her exit line to the walnut paneling, at no one, at everyone. She always did love a scene, my mother said, meaning Opal, meaning me, meaning, I suspect, every woman who ever put a true number where the family could see it. Wade did not stand. Wade was looking at the framed photograph in his hands, the scalloped edges, the checked dress, the suitcase. And I watched my brother look up from the photograph at our father and start to assemble a question he was 40 years late in asking. I did not stay for it. Some tuitions a man has to pay himself. I thought that was the reversal, friends. I drove home believing the building was the ending, and I slept 12 hours, and for about 6 weeks I lived as if the account had finally closed. I should have known better. No account closes just because one party wants it to. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday in May. My father was contesting the will. The petition said things about me that still sting after 34 years. Undue influence. A granddaughter, estranged from the family for over a decade, who reappeared in the final 11 days of a dying woman's life and inserted herself between the deceased and her natural heirs. Diminished capacity. An elderly stroke victim, not of sound mind, manipulated in a hospital room while her loving son was kept away. There was a witness list. Sheriff Dwight Hobbs was on it. The pastor of First Methodist was on it. Half the potluck was on it, friends. Every casserole in that town lined up to swear that Wendell Danner was a devoted son and his daughter was a scheming stranger. And the case would be heard at the county courthouse, 11 miles from a window that had said Danner and Son for 44 years. I sat on my porch swing with that petition, and for the first time since the boarding house, I felt 18 again, in the bad way. Because here is what a will contest actually threatens. If he won, it would not just take the building. It would take her. It would put on the county record, forever, under a seal, that Opal Danner had not been in her right mind, that her last clear act was really her granddaughter's trick. He was not suing me for a building. He was suing for the story. He wanted the official version, stamped and filed, to say that the women in this family had never once acted on their own. I called Beecham the next morning before 8, and Beecham listened to me get through about half of my panic, and then interrupted gently, the way you interrupt someone bailing a boat that is not actually leaking. Miss Danner, he said, come to Fort Wayne. There is a folder your grandmother instructed me to open in exactly this event, and she asked me to tell you something when I opened it. I asked what. She asked me to say, tell the child her grandmother knew her son. I drove to Fort Wayne with my hands calm and cold and precise on the wheel, and in that walnut office, Beecham laid out on the desk, one item at a time, like a dealer proving a deck is clean, the contents of Opal Danner's folder. Item 1. Her will, the operative one, dated April of 1990. 1990, friends. 2 full years before the stroke, 2 years before I ever set foot in that hospital. Whatever influence I had exerted, I had apparently exerted it backward through time. Item 2. A letter from her doctor dated the same week in 1990, examining her at her own request and certifying her competent, oriented, and, the doctor had added in his own hand, sharper than my nurse's. Item 3. A sworn statement notarized in Beecham's office in 1990, in which Opal Marie Danner set down, in her own words, why she was leaving the building to me and to no one else. Beecham read it to me out loud because she had instructed him to, and I am going to give you the heart of it close to verbatim because I have a copy in my safe deposit box and I have read it more times than any psalm. I watched my husband take a daughter's money in 1948 and call it family. I watched my son take a daughter's name in 1978 and call it family. I said nothing the first time, and my daughter has not written since 1949. I said too little the second time, and it was my granddaughter who finally wrote it down, alone, at a notary's counter at 20 years old, with no one standing beside her. This building was purchased with the wages of a girl this family erased. It will pass to the girl this family tried to erase and could not. I am of sound mind. Which is more, if the court will forgive me, than I can say for the custom this town has been honoring for 40 years. And item 4. Ledgers, friends, 21 years of them in her Palmer method hand. Every rent payment her son ever made, every late one, every partial one, and folded in with them. Bank statements showing that while she was supposedly under my influence, her money had gone nowhere at all. Just a certificate of deposit rolling over in Marion since 1985, untouched. The most organized client of a 40-year career. I sat in that office and I cried, friends, for the first time since the fire escape, and Beecham, bless him, examined his bow tie in the window reflection until I was through. She had known this fight was coming. She had armored me for it 2 years before her own son fired the first shot. That is what a matriarch actually is, not the woman at the head of the table, the woman who has already read the ending and quietly rewritten it. If you are still with me, do me one kindness before the courtroom. If this story has put you in mind of a grandmother or an aunt or anyone who kept the record when it would have been easier to burn it, put her first name in the comments. I read every one, and I would like her ledger to have one more entry in it tonight. And subscribe if you have not, because what happened in that courtroom and what happened 20 years after it are the reasons I waited until 64 to tell this story at all. The hearing came in October of 1992. County courthouse, oak benches, the front 2 rows stocked with potluck. My father wore his church suit, my mother wore navy and her bus stop face, and their lawyer, a young man from Muncie with beautiful hair, stood up and told the judge a story about a devoted son and a scheming stranger, and he told it well. Friends, I will give him that. It was a good story. It simply had no paperwork. Beecham stood up like a man rising from Sunday dinner and entered the will dated 1990. A date is a date. He entered the doctor's letter, sharper than my nurse's. Somebody in the back row laughed and turned it into a cough. He entered the ledgers and walked the judge down 21 years of the first of the month, and you could feel the room shift as they did their quiet work. Because a courtroom, friends, is just a church for records, and my grandmother had come to it as its best parishioner. And then Beecham said the deceased anticipated that her state of mind would be questioned and left a statement she asked to be read aloud in exactly that event. And he read it, all of it. The 1948 sentence, the 1978 sentence, the daughter who had not written since 1949, and the granddaughter at the notary's counter with no one beside her. I watched a town hear its own history read into a public record for the first time, over the objection of nobody, because you cannot object to a dead woman being of sound mind while her sound mind is dismantling you clause by clause. The pastor of First Methodist looked at his shoes. Sheriff Hobbs left before the recess and did not come back. And my father sat perfectly still through all of it except for one moment. One. At the words, I watched my son take a daughter's name in 1978 and call it family. His head turned, slowly, and he looked at me across that courtroom. I had spent years preparing for that look. I had expected fury. It was worse. It was the look of a man in the middle of a magic trick going wrong, watching the ledger he had kept off the books his whole life suddenly speak in his mother's voice, in a courthouse, in front of the potluck. For the first time in his 60 years, the record did not care who his father was. The judge did not need long. The will was upheld in every particular. Costs were awarded against the petitioner, which meant that my father, having once spent 11 months paying back the money he took in my name, now got to pay Beecham's fee for the privilege of losing the story, too. Outside, on the courthouse steps in the October sun, my mother stopped in front of me for the last conversation we ever had. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her assemble and reject several sentences, and I will always wonder about the ones she rejected. What she finally said was, "You are just like her." She did not say which her. Doreen, who ran, Opal, who recorded. I have decided over the years that she meant all of them, the entire unbroken line of us, every woman who ever put a true number where this family could see it. So I said thank you, and I meant it all the way to the ground. And my mother heard that I meant it, and something crossed her face that I have never been able to name, and she walked to the car where my father was waiting, and she did not look back. And that was the end of my mother in my life, though she lived another 19 years. Wade caught up to me at my car, 28 years old, hat in his hands, the family posture. He stood there while I found my keys, and finally he said, I hung the picture up. The girl with the suitcase. Dad will not say who she is. I looked at my brother, and I saw, for the first time, not the boy on the counter with the creamsicle, but another inheritor of a story nobody would tell him. Her name was Doreen, I said. She was Dad's sister. Ask him what happened to her savings in 1948. And then, because I am my grandmother's granddaughter, before I am anyone else's anything, I said, and Wade, when he will not answer. Notice that. I drove back to Indianapolis and did not see Maple Creek again for 23 years. I will move us through those years honestly, which means quickly, because the truth about the long middle of a life after a war is that it is quiet, and the quiet is the victory. And quiet makes a poor story, but a wonderful home. I built my practice. Small businesses, widows sorting estates, and more than a few frightened 20-year-olds with ruined credit files who found their way to me through a bank fraud department where a woman with a voice that had heard everything twice apparently kept my card in her drawer for years. I never charged those kids a dime. You know why. Beecham's office managed the building. I never raised my father's rent. Not once in the 12 years he had left, and understand, that was not mercy. The rent was Doreen's money coming home, and you do not put interest on a homecoming. He never missed a month. He was, I told you, a man of his word in the strangest places. And every first of the month, money moved from Danner and Son to a trust with my name inside it, and I promise you he thought of me every single time, which is the only inheritance I ever got directly from him, and I did not refuse it. He died in 2004, at the store, at the counter, mid-afternoon, reaching for the register. Wade found him. The Maple Creek paper gave him 4 paragraphs and called him a pillar. I read the obituary at my kitchen table. I was listed nowhere in it. Survived by his loving wife, Arlene, his son, Wade, his granddaughter, Kayla. Erased even in his last paperwork, friends, which by then had no power over me at all because I had learned the family secret the hard way and made it my profession. The official version is just the version somebody bothered to file, so I filed my own. I sat down that night and wrote in my journal everything true about my father, the feed sack hand on my shoulder, the 2 gentle pats on my cheek, the lecture in 3 parts, the tears in stereo, the courtroom look, and I dated it, and I signed it. Both obituaries exist, friends. Only mine is accurate. I went to the funeral, stood at the very back of First Methodist, and left before the receiving line, and on the way out of town I drove past the store, slowly, once. The gold letters were faded to the color of weak tea. Danner and Son, still singular, still gravity. Half of Main Street was plywood by then because the highway bypass had opened in 1998 and a supercenter had landed out by the interstate, and small towns, friends, get their names taken too. My mother lived 7 more years in the house with her books balanced and her opinions intact. When she died in 2011, Beecham's office called me, and I sent flowers and did not go, and I want to be honest about that decision too. Forgiveness, my grandmother's will said, is available upon request. Mine was too. The request never came. You cannot fill out the form for the other party. Some accounts close unbalanced, and the auditor's job is not to force them, it is to note them accurately and carry on. Here is what I could not see coming. Late on a Thursday night in October of 2015, my telephone rang, and a young woman's voice, half wrecked with crying and trying hard to sound professional, said, I am sorry to call so late. Is this Sylvia Danner? The Sylvia Danner who used to be from Maple Creek? I said it was. And the voice took a breath, the length of a diving board, and said, My name is Kayla Danner. I think you are my great aunt. And I am sorry, I know this is strange, because Dad always told me you died before I was born. Died. Hold that word up to the light with me, friends, because you have seen it before. There was no Doreen in our family. I knew every headstone. This family does not cast out its daughters, you see. That would require admitting there was something to cast out. It buries us alive in the conversation instead and tells the children the grave is real. For one generation, I was dead as a figure of speech. By the next, I was dead as a fact. That is how erasure compounds. 21% interest. I got my voice level, Greta's training, and I said, I am very much alive, Kayla, and I am so glad you called, and I need you to tell me what is wrong, because something was wrong. 25-year-old women do not ring dead relatives at 11 at night to discuss genealogy. And Kayla, in a rush, like a dam failing, told me she was living in Fort Wayne, working at a dental office, engaged to a boy named Marcus. They had gone to get pre-approved for a little house, and the loan officer had turned his monitor a few degrees toward her. Not all the way, just the amount people turn a screen when the news is bad and not technically theirs to deliver. Collections, a charge off. A credit card opened 9 years ago. Kayla was 25. Friends. And a line of credit at a bank in Maple Creek opened the very month she turned 16, drawn down over the years in amounts that tracked exactly like a failing store gasping for oxygen. $19,000, give or take. It is never even original, friends. That is the thing about this kind of man. He inherits the crime like the store, unrenovated, and runs it the same way his father did, into the same ground. I asked how she had found me, and Kayla said, and I had to sit down on the stairs. There was a photograph at Grandma Arlene's house when I was little, a girl with a suitcase, and when I asked Dad about it, he got strange. And last week, when the bank said Maple Creek, I remembered it, and I started digging in the county records online, and your name kept coming up in a court file from 1992. So I pulled the file. Aunt Sylvia, I read what your grandmother wrote, the one they read out loud. And then I found your CPA license on the state website. And I have been sitting with your phone number for 3 days. 3 days. I put a pencil mark on my calendar for each one of hers. Later, next to where mine would have been. 19 for me, 3 for her. The girls are getting faster. Friends, that is the whole hope of the world, right there. The girls are getting faster. I said, Kayla, I am going to tell you 3 things, and I need you to write them down because in this family we write things down. 1, you did nothing wrong, and none of what is coming is your fault, including the parts that will feel like it. 2, there is a way through this. I have walked it personally, and I will walk it with you every step, starting tomorrow morning. 3, and she was crying by then, and I confess my own eyes were not dry. You come from a long line of women who count, sweetheart. It skipped nobody, and we are going to make the book say it sooner. I drove to Fort Wayne the next morning. We sat at her little kitchen table, Kayla and Marcus and me, with the 3 bureau reports fanned out like tarot, the way mine had been fanned on Patrice's floor in 1982, and I walked her through the recipe the fraud woman had walked me through when the phone still had cords. Police report, identity theft, affidavit. And on that affidavit, one line, where you print the name of the person who used your identity and you sign underneath it, under penalty of perjury. Kayla got all the way to the line. And then she sat with the pen hovering and she looked up at me and asked the question I had been waiting 33 years for somebody to ask. Did you file yours? I opened my purse. I have carried a copy of that affidavit, folded soft as cloth at the creases behind my old CPA license in a worn brown leather wallet, since before this girl was born. Not for spite, friends. Bookkeepers carry backup documentation. It is a work habit. I laid it on the table next to hers, my 1982 next to her 2015, my father's name in my block letters next to the blank line waiting for hers. 33 years apart, and the forms had barely changed. Neither had the crime. Kayla read it, top to bottom. Then she took the pen and printed in block letters Wade Emmett Danner, and her hand did not shake either. And I sat there watching a 25-year-old dental receptionist and a 67-year family tradition at a kitchen table, and I thought, Nana, for the record, it stops here. It stops with this girl at this table on a Friday. 2 weeks later, my phone rang after supper, and it was Wade. The first words my brother had said to me in 23 years, and he was crying. And I know what you are bracing for, friends, because I braced for it too. I stood in my kitchen at 53 years old with the receiver at my ear, and every cell in my body did what it was trained to do at the sound of a Danner man crying into a telephone. I listened underneath. I listened for the second channel, the logistics under the grief, the register voice in the background, the deadline dressed up as a broken heart. Sylvie, he said. He had not called me Sylvie since before the Camaro. Sylvie, she filed it. The bank called me today. My own daughter filed it. And I waited, cold, for the ask. Get her to withdraw it. Talk to her. Sylvie, family means nobody keeps score. The ask did not come. What came instead was this. And I will give it to you as close to word for word as my memory holds, because it is the only apology anyone from that house ever ran to ground. I am not calling to ask you to fix it, he said. I called to say I finally understand what Monday was. I was 16, Sylvie. I heard them at the kitchen table that spring, Mom and Dad and the man from the bank going through it. Her name is Clean, Dad kept saying. The girl's name is Clean. We put it on her name until the store comes back. And I knew they meant you, and I knew the car was part of it somehow, and I wanted the car, Sylvie. God help me, I was 16 and I wanted the car, so I told myself it was grown folks' business. And then on your birthday, you were standing on the porch with Dad, and you looked at me through the kitchen window. And I looked away. I have been looking away for 35 years. The night you left, I heard you on the stairs. I heard the kitchen door. I lay in my bed with my new car keys on the nightstand, and I let you walk to the Sunoco in the dark, silence on the line. And then my brother said the thing I had never guessed, in all my counting, the one entry I had never found because I had never thought to look for it. Sylvie, the down payment on the Camaro. Years later, I found the paperwork in Dad's files. It was drawn off the credit line at First State, the one with your name on it, Friends. The car was bought with my name. Sit with me in that kitchen a minute, because 33 years after the affidavit, I had to hold the counter. On my 18th birthday, on the porch in my ironed dress, I applauded a cherry red Camaro that I was paying for. The lecture about responsibility was delivered to the collateral. Family means nobody keeps score, my father said, to the girl whose name was carrying the score at 21%, 10 feet from the car it had purchased. He tossed my brother the keys to my credit friends across the yard with a ribbon on it. I did not say any of that to Wade. What I said, when I could, was, "Why are you telling me this now?" And Wade said, "Because Kayla will not speak to me, and she is right not to, and somebody in this family is finally keeping the record, and I want it kept straight." I did what Dad did, Sylvie. I told myself it was different because I meant to pay it back, and he probably told himself the same thing, and probably his dad before him, whoever that girl with the suitcase was. I know about her now, by the way. Doreen. I made Mom tell me before she passed. And then my brother, 51 years old, said, I am not asking Kayla to withdraw anything. I am pleading guilty to whatever comes. I just needed one person from the before to hear me say it out loud. And Sylvie, there is money coming to her. I am selling the car. I said, "What car?" And Wade gave a laugh with no floor under it and said, "The Camaro, Sylvie." I never could let it go. It has been under a tarp in my garage for 35 years. Every time things got bad, I would go out and look at it, and I could never once figure out why looking at it made me feel worse. Now I know. It was never mine. I was 16 years old, and they handed me my sister with a ribbon on her. He sold it that winter. A collector from Illinois, $31,000, original everything, garage kept, and Wade Danner signed the title over and put every dollar against the accounts opened in his daughter's name and paid the difference in installments from his wages, because by then, Friends, the store was gone. He had closed Danner and Son the year before. 66 years after a man on a ladder painted a prophecy in gold leaf with a daughter's savings, the prophecy finally ran out of daughters. Which brings me to the drawer. As the building's owner, I got the call when the store's last boxes went out and the keys had to come back, and I said no. I will collect the keys myself. And on a cold, bright morning in March of 2016, I parked on Main and 3rd, 36 years after the Trailways bus, and let myself into my family's store for the first time since I was 18. Empty. It was so small. That is what took my breath. The stockroom where I stood on a milk crate, the counter where Wade ate his creamsicle, the stretch of oak floor I had mopped 10,000 times, All of it would have fit inside my house in Irvington with room left over. The empires of our childhood are always smaller than the shadow they threw. The register was still on the counter. Too old to sell, the liquidator had said. 1940s, cast metal, heavy as an anvil. I stood in front of it for a long moment. Then I did what my grandmother's right hand had done on a hospital blanket in 1992, that small flat motion, laying something down. I opened the drawer and I lifted out the empty cash tray. And there it was. 67 years under the money, friends. A picture of a mesa at sunset. The colors gone to sepia ghosts. Postmark Tucumcari, New Mexico, October 1949. I made it somewhere that writes my name down. I keep books for a ranch supply and they pay me Fridays like anyone. Do not send Daddy after me and do not send apologies you have to hide. Tell Wendell the sign is his problem now. Your daughter, Doreen. I stood alone in that empty store and read an 18-year-old bookkeeper's handwriting, the only proof of her that ever sat within 100 feet of her father, and it had outlasted him, and the sun, and the sign, and the store itself. The record survives, friends. That is its whole job. You hide it under the money, and you wait, and the counting men count on top of it their whole lives, and never once look underneath. It took me 3 weeks to find her. Doreen had a married name, Ashby, and she had died in 2011, the same year as my mother, 81 years old, the same age as her mother in Tucumcari, where she had gotten off the bus in 1949 and simply stayed. The obituary, when I found it, undid me in one line. Doreen Ashby, it said, retired after 44 years as head bookkeeper of Koshway Ranch and Feed Supply, where the books, her employer once said, never missed by a nickel in 4 decades. She got off a bus with a suitcase, friends, and walked into the first feed store she found, and kept its books for 44 years. The same work, the same shelves, the same seed, the same registers. 800 miles from a store that would not put her name on the glass, she built the identical life, except for one difference. They paid her Fridays like anyone. That is all she ever asked. If you go back and read the postcard, not revenge, not the store, not even an apology, unless it could be given in the open, just to be written down and paid like anyone. The obituary listed one survivor, a daughter, Ruth, and a phone number was findable, friends, because I am who I am. I sat at my kitchen table one evening in April with the postcard in front of me and dialed a number in New Mexico, and a woman about my age answered, and I said, "My name is Sylvia Danner, and I am calling from Indiana, and I believe your mother was my aunt." The line went quiet a moment, and then Ruth Ashby said, "Well, Mama always said Indiana might call one day. She said if it was a man, hang up, and if it was a woman, put on more coffee." We talked for 3 hours that first night. I read her the postcard, and Ruth cried because Doreen had never been sure it arrived, had wondered for 60 years whether her mother read it or her father burned it. And I got to say, "Your grandmother hid it under the cash tray in his own register the week it came, and it sat under his money every night he counted for the rest of his working life." And Ruth laughed and cried at the same time and said, "Oh, Mama would have loved that. Under the money." That is the best bookkeeping joke I have ever heard. I told her everything, the sign, the Camaro, the affidavits, hers, mine, Kayla's, the statement read aloud in the courtroom, and Ruth told me hers. Doreen had married a quiet rancher, been widowed young, raised Ruth on a bookkeeper's wages, and never owed a soul a nickel. She kept one photograph on her dresser her whole life, a woman in an apron on a porch in Indiana, and would not discuss her. Except every year on the 1st of October, she baked a yellow cake with chocolate frosting, for no occasion Ruth could ever identify. Friends, I had to put the phone down for a moment. A yellow cake? Chocolate frosting? No occasion. I did not tell Ruth what our family's birthday cakes were or who baked them or what got written on mine in blue cursive in 1980. Some entries you make in your own ledger and carry quietly, but I will tell you. October 1st was Opal's birthday. 62 years, friends. 62 years, 800 miles, and a daughter who would not speak her mother's name baked her mother's cake every single year, for no one, and ate a slice and went to bed. Do not let anyone tell you the ones who leave stop loving. They just move the account to a bank where no one can rob it. That June, I flew to New Mexico. Ruth met me at the airport holding a hand-lettered sign that said, "Danner and Daughter," and I laughed so hard in that terminal a security man came over to check on us. We drove to Tucumcari, and I stood at Doreen's grave in the hot wind, red dirt, a sky like the inside of a bell, as far from Maple Creek as the moon. The stone said Doreen Ashby, and under it, because Ruth had chosen it, one line. Her books balanced. I put my hand on the stone and I told her three things out loud because in this family we say things out loud now. The postcard arrived, your mother kept it under his money, and the sign came down, sweetheart. I get to say that last part because of what happened with the building, and that is the last story I have for you. So pour yourself something and let me land this plane. The store stood empty through 2016 while Beecham's office fielded offers: a vape shop, a payday lender, a man who wanted to strip the oak floor and part out the fixtures. I said no, and absolutely not. And the young partner who manages things now began to gently suggest that sentiment was expensive. And then in the spring of 2017, a letter arrived, an actual letter, handwritten from a young couple in Fort Wayne. And the moment I read it, I knew the account had found its balance. They wanted to open a bakery. Her grandmother's recipes, his coffee, a small town storefront they could afford, somewhere with good bones, and a landlord who was not a spreadsheet in Chicago. They had driven through Maple Creek on a Sunday and seen the gold letters and the oak floor through the glass, and the letter said, and I am quoting exactly because I framed it, "A building like that deserves to smell like bread again." It had never smelled like bread, it had smelled like seed corn and axle grease and my whole unrecorded childhood, but I understood her. The building deserved a future that fed people. I leased it to them at a rate the young partner called philanthropic on one condition, and I wrote the condition into the lease myself, in the plainest language of my career. The tenant shall, at the landlord's expense, repaint the front glass with the name of the tenant's business, and the prior lettering shall be fully and permanently removed. In October of 2017, on the 1st, though I told no one why I picked the date, I stood on the corner of Main and 3rd and watched a painter on a ladder scrape 69 years of gold leaf off my grandfather's glass. Danner and Son, established 1948, came down in curls of dead gilt, and the painter swept the curls into a dustpan and looked at me oddly when I asked to keep them. They are in a mason jar on my desk, friends. $1,100 of a girl's canning plant wages is what is in that jar, transmuted, all that was ever left of it. I priced mason jars off a milk crate when I was 10. This is the only one I ever kept. And then he painted the new name, in a warm cream color the tenants chose, with a little sheaf of wheat, and I stood on the sidewalk where Doreen stood in 1949 in her checked dress, and I watched the glass learn its new sentence. Morning Table Bakery. And underneath, smaller. Everyone welcome. Everything from scratch. The town came around the way towns do, slowly, then all at once. The bakery thrives. On Saturdays, there is a line out the door, and the oak floor I mopped 10,000 times has been sanded down to honey, and it carries chairs now, and mothers and old men with coffee and homework after school. Kayla and Marcus married in 2017 and bought their little house, credit clean. The prosecutor offered Wade a deferral, restitution, and probation, largely, I suspect, because the restitution was already paid before the ink dried, one cherry red Camaro at a time. Kayla speaks to her father again, carefully. Twice a year, in public places, which I told her is not coldness, it is bookkeeping. You can reopen an account at a lower credit limit. You just never again lend what you cannot survive losing. Wade and I have coffee every October when he drives down, 1 hour, at a diner, and at the end, every year, the same small liturgy. He says, "I am sorry, Sylvie," and I say, "I know, Wade, it is on the record." And it is enough. It is not everything, friends. It is enough. There is a difference, and knowing that difference is most of what peace is. Patrice and DeWitt retired to a lake an hour east, and DeWitt makes Opal's apple crisp from the sealed envelope. And he has never once shown either of us the recipe, and honestly, we respect him more for it. Ruth flies out every other year, or I fly there. She calls me her sister cousin. We have decided the genealogy chart is not the boss of us. And I never did learn everything, and I want you to hear me make peace with that, because your story will have holes too, and you should not let anybody call the holes failure. I never learned what Doreen's first years out west cost her because she never told even Ruth. I never learned what my mother almost said on the courthouse steps. I never learned who gave my father the boarding house number in 1980. The ledger has blank cells, friends. It balances anyway. That is the mercy I never expected arithmetic to have in it. Last Friday was my birthday, 64, and here is where I have been driving us all evening, so come stand next to me. There is a tradition now, 3 years old, which is young for a tradition, but it has good bones. I drive up to Maple Creek on the 6th of June, and the Morning Table Bakery closes an hour early. Hand-lettered sign in the window, private party, back tomorrow. This year, Kayla came with the baby, my great-great-niece, 11 months old, named, and I did not ask them to do this, and I cried anyway, Opal. Ruth flew in, Patrice and DeWitt drove up, Wade came and stood at the edge of the room the first year, and closer the second year, and this year he handed out forks. And at the table by the front window on a cake stand sat a yellow cake with chocolate frosting, baked from scratch in the building bought with Doreen's wages on ground my grandmother took as back pay and handed to me as evidence. The first year, the baker asked me what to write on it, and I stood in that storefront where I once was good help, and I felt 60 years of frosting go by. Way to go, Wade. And I gave her the order I have given every year since, just the name. Nice and big. No occasion, no message, just make the name take up the whole cake. Sylvia. Blue cursive, friends, because I am not above a little symmetry. And 18 candles. The baker thinks it is a joke about my age and lets it alone. Kayla knows. I told her the whole story before her wedding, all of it. The porch, the lecture, the Sunoco, because the women in this family get the record now, entire, while everyone is still alive to answer questions. No more photographs in drawers, no more names you are not old enough to carry. So this year, like every year now, the room went dim, and the candles came lit, and the people I chose and the people who chose me back sang the song with my name in it. And I stood over 18 candles at 64 years old in the building where I learned to count, and I will tell you exactly what I wished, the same wish as every year, which is no wish at all, really. It is an entry. For the record, all of it happened. The milk crate and the mop and the folder flipped shut, the bedsheet in the driveway and the lecture in 3 parts, the bus and the boarding house and the affidavit with his name in my block letters, the ledgers and the postcard and the gold leaf in the mason jar. All of it happened, and none of it gets to decide what I am worth, because I audited that claim myself at 18 at a Sunoco in the dark and found it false. Then I blew them out in one breath. 64 years old. One breath. The baby clapped. And somewhere, I have to believe a woman in a checked dress and a woman in an apron were going over the books together and finding them, at very long last, in balance. You do not regret the debit column, friends. You reconcile it. The miracle of a life honestly kept is not that the hurt disappears. It is that the page holds both columns and still comes out whole. My name is Sylvia K. Danner. I baked my own cakes for 18 years, and now a whole town bakes mine. They gave my brother a car and me a lecture, and it turned out the car was rented against my name, and the lecture, God help him, was the only thing my father ever gave me outright. Responsibility, gratitude, family. He was right about all 3, friends. He just never learned what the words meant, and I did, and that is the whole inheritance, and I'm handing it to you now, free and clear. Keep your own record, sign only what is true, and if the people who should love you will not write your name down, be patient, be exact, and be gone by morning. Somewhere there is a place that writes your name down. Mine turned out to be the same corner I left from, which is life's idea of a joke, and I have decided to laugh. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. If this story sounded like your family, tell me in the comments. First names only. We protect our own here. Leave a like if you made it to the end, and subscribe because I am 64 and I know where the rest of the paperwork is buried. It is late now, and there is one slice of birthday cake left under a napkin, and I intend to have it with my tea. Both columns friends, the page holds. Good night from my kitchen to yours, for the record.